This is the Super Rad BMX Podcast. Down the first straight is the cruising Cornhusker over the jump bonsai Brad. Now your host Brad Fanshaw and Tim Lilladora.
Hey everybody, welcome to Super Rad BMX. And we've been out on the road doing stuff. I hope you saw our coverage of the first USA BMX race of the season. It was the SoCal Nationals. I went out there, got a little bit of the lowdown on what was going on the races. Then we went over to the ABSA Pro event, the bike show, and got that all covered. If you haven't checked it out yet, please go to the Radmatic channel and see it, man. It was we got some great interviews and lots of cool bikes at the bike show. So make sure you check it out, and it's easy because it's like maybe 15, 20 minutes. So you can fit it in anytime. If you had your eyes open, you saw that we have a guest tonight, and you probably already know who he is, but we have a great guest, a very special show today. Our friend and pro BMXer Eddy King, probably most notable, although, Torker years, everything like that, wheels and things. But, most people remember him on Diamond Back because of all the years that he was there. And it's really cool because we're going to talk about Eddy's background, but Eddy actually pulled us aside and said, hey guys, I really want to talk about my former teammate and friend, Turbo Harry Leary, and give us the lowdown on what's going on. And if you don't know and you're not aware, last September of 24, Harry did unexpectedly pass away. He died at 65 years old. So we're going to give you more behind the scenes look tonight. But before we do, let me give you one other reminder, which is a reminder to follow the Radmatic channel on YouTube. And that's Radmatic, is Radmatic with 2 T's in the Matic. Follow us on YouTube. And please like the episodes, give us comments. That helps everything. If you follow the channel and you like the episodes, it's really important for our station, our channel. Also, hey man, you need some swag. You need some of this swag. Tim's got one on, and you can grab that Super Rad BMX swag, all of our t-shirts at radmatic.com. So just go over there, check it out. There's even one Tim did of me doing a bunny hop. I'm going to have to get one of those, Tim, so I can wear myself on a shirt. That'd be weird. But
yeah,
yes,
I think we need to give you the hookup on that one.
Yeah. So anyways, we got to get started, man. Eddy's got his Torker shirt on. I've got my Torker frame sitting behind me on the wall, and we're ready to get going. Eddy, welcome to Super Rad BMX.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Now, totally un-BMX related. Tim was telling me about the adventure that you guys had. How long ago was that, Tim, when Ed was in town? And, tell us what you guys did.
I think that was last August, wasn't it, Ed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us.
We're talking about up in Omaha, by the way.
Yeah. Tell us how you wound up in Omaha, Nebraska in August.
Well, to keep myself busy these days, I kind of belong to an adaptive gym here in Phoenix called Abilities 360. And on there, I've been probably playing the last 5 years on the softball team, which is like co-sponsored by, well, not just co-sponsored, we're sponsored by the MLB team, the Arizona Diamondbacks, and we pretty much start training. We train in the off season a little bit. We'll start picking up here really quick and start getting ready for a couple of matches before the World Series. And then the World Series usually is in like the first or second week in August. And last year, the World Series just happened to be in Omaha, Nebraska, in the middle of the cornfield.
in the
Literally.
middle of
And
a
it literally
cornfield.
was. But it was in a nice facility that they built, specifically for this, because isn't the Omaha team or the Fremont team like high up in the rankings?
Yeah, they are probably the number one team in the country. They've been that way for, I don't know. I think you saw the trophies they showed off there. I think for the last, I don't know, 15 years. I mean, no, this has been around for 30 years, and they probably have won close to half of the championships.
Wow.
So they're the ballers.
Yeah. So we've only been around necessarily for 5 or 6 years. So they have a little more experience than all of us trying to, gather adaptive athletes on wheelchairs to get out there and to compete with them. It's a little bit different, but we're there. We're up and coming still.
That's cool. That's cool. And it was nice that you and Tim got to meet up and hang out a little bit while you were up there, because that's his stomping grounds, and that's very cool. Now, Eddy, it's I want to cover a little bit of your racing and things like that. But now, originally, you're from the Philippines, correct? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines in '64, and then stayed there probably for a couple of years, and then my dad got transferred to Maryland, and that's where my brother was born. My brother was born in Edwards Air Force Base.
Oh, really?
Out there. So he wasn't born in San Diego.
Wow.
Some people may think so. And then we moved to San Diego in 1970, and that's where my dad was stationed for the rest of his naval career. And we've never really left until
never really left. Now, you didn't mention, but for those of you who maybe don't know, Mike King is Eddy's brother, and one of the pairs of brothers that we think of. I think of Brent and Brian Patterson. I think of Richie and Ronnie Anderson, and I think of Eddy and Mike King. It's those pairs that did their fare of domination in the BMX ranks. The things that I think about when I think of you is we've known each other for a long time. I know Tim's known you for a long time because of our ABA time, but I think back before we really knew each other were San Diego race days, and that was when I began racing myself. And racing at tracks like Rancho San Diego, Bike Shop of El Cajon, and going to places like Bike Shop El Cajon, Santee Cyclery, Wheels and Things. And, it was pretty much a hub of BMX racing. And I remember some of the names that stuck in my mind were like Boo Boo Moreno and Coy Hudson, Bobby Nybo. Bobby Nybo was always one of the guys that I had to race in my class, and he was pretty fast. And what do you remember about the early days when you were racing at those tracks?
I remember being shoveled into the Nybo van to go to the races a lot of times, and didn't really know where I was going because it was one of those old camper shells on the back of a Cheyenne pickup truck, and it didn't have any windows.
We've done that. We
just kind of slept in the back, and they would just, take us to the races wherever we, had to go. And it was just, how is it? Just so pure and kind of just innocent for the most part. It was just a lot of fun. That's all it was
raw.
about.
We were just racing, man. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, when you see some of these old vintage races and real vintage races. I just saw one a couple of days ago about Escape Country in 1974. And I was like, everybody had the bullhorn handlebars, and
right.
Those guys weren't going that fast, but they thought they were going really fast. And it was just fun. Not necessarily about winning, and you're just out there riding and racing with your buddies.
And the track.
And it was all new. It was new to us.
Yeah.
When you're that age, this is like a new, exciting thing, and you've got your buddies with you, and every track is different. So I hear these stories about early San Diego BMX from Brad when he moved to Omaha. Yeah, I saw some of the pictures of the tracks, and BMX News newspaper that we'd get, 2 months after the events happened. But yeah, I mean, I saw pictures of little Eddy King, on a little bike, and I'm like, wow, that kid looks fast. And yeah, it was like legendary stories that I heard secondhand, and in the magazines.
What was kind of amazing with that era? One time I want to say maybe 79 or 80, there was close to 1,000 or 1,200 members
Isn't that crazy?
in the BMX San Diego BMX Association. 1,000
Wow.
to 1,200 members. I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, you
Yeah.
think about those numbers, and if they had those numbers now, I mean, we probably had 4 or 5 tracks just in San Diego County almost at one time.
What was your favorite track back then?
It had to be, well, San Diego was Rancho for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that place was just cool.
It was awesome.
Great for pictures, and it was just, anything downhill back then was awesome.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. But even like Bike Shop of El Cajon, what always sticks out in that track is the footprint. They didn't have much room, but man, they dug those berms down in, and you came out of the gate and went into that first berm, and you like went down into it and then up out of it. I always thought that was cool.
There was a flag start too.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, that they probably did that on what? Oh, maybe a 5,000 square foot lot.
Yeah, it was tiny.
Yeah, it wasn't very big. If that, maybe not even 5,000, maybe 4,000. But they ended up putting up 1, 2, 3, 4 turns, I think.
Yeah, and some good jumps. They had those jumps where they dug down in, so you went in and up, and you got that was good. It was a great track. And you know what else was really something that I remember about then is that like you could go to the Bike Shop El Cajon and ride it whenever you wanted. It wasn't like later on when there was a fence around it and like that, but they used to let us come down and ride. That was cool. If I could get my dad to put me in the car and take me there, because I didn't live close to it. But
yeah. And we had some good tracks back then. Lakeside's another fun track back then, even though it really was only 2.5 turns. If you want
I remember Lakeside, yeah.
If you want to call a dog leg it really a turn, but really only had 1 turn. It was just a flat out race to that one back turn in the first straightaway, and then you made a left turn, and then you kind of headed down in a dog leg to the finish line.
And Lakeside was the first place that I ever saw anybody show up with tough wheels. And it was Botima and I don't remember who else, but they had the prototypes. And I was like, wow, what do those guys have? It was pretty cool. And
a story with the Lakeside track? I can say it now.
We love stories.
77, I was on tour at the time. Perry Kramer didn't want to go on tour on that SE bus tour. He was smart. Yep. He figured that stuff out. Well, anyway, they had the firecracker race in July, obviously, in Lakeside. And Perry tells me this story from time to time that he got into a big fight with the Wheels and Things rider, Jesse Pedron, at the finish line. And it ended up being like Perry and all of Jesse's brothers and everything. It was pretty funny to hear that story. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then I think about it and go, like, you know what? I think I did hear about that story on the team when we came back on tour. But just a small side note about Lakeside and back in the day.
So before we move on, talk a little bit about the bike shops, because the bike shops down there were equally as impressive as the tracks. Now, I don't know, and that's why I want to hear it from you, because I remember them being like these wonderlands, like going into Wheels and Things, and just, it was like they had everything I could ever want. Bike Shop El Cajon. I rode for Santee Cyclery for a while, and it was like, did you have the same feeling, or was it just because I wanted stuff,
Yeah. Well, let's see. I don't remember too much of the bike shop in El Cajon. Not that much when I was there for the most part. Because I didn't really get the chance to hang out at the bike shop at that age. I was 10 years old.
Yeah,
it was like, drop off your bike and pick it up later on, or just grab whatever, bike that they had for you all ready to go type of deal. Wheels and Things was a different story.
Right.
There, kind of pretty much got to hang out at the time a little bit longer. I was a little bit older at that time. I was what, I don't know, 13, 12 or something. Who knows? I don't remember. But, he had a big shop.
That was a big shop, yeah.
Big shop, and they did big numbers out of there compared to what I was used to before. I remember, Christmas time, they were building silver streaks day and night to get them out before Christmas Eve. I mean, hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them. It was crazy.
I always got the impression. Yeah, I always got the impression, I never went to Wheels and things like you guys did, but I always got the impression it was huge, just from seeing pictures and ads, they had a big team. It doesn't surprise me that they were really pumping out those numbers on those bikes.
Yeah.
Because that was the heyday of BMX.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I remember you could go there and they had all the bike frames. They had all the trick stuff, that big counter. And it was real close to my house. I lived just on the hill, over from it. And so we used to go there practically every day after school and check it out. And Sandy was a smart dude too, because I was on him about, hey, man, I'd like to ride for you guys. I'd like to ride for you guys. And I don't know if you remember this, Ed, but their front curb was super tall. It was like a really tall front curb out front. And Sandy said to me, he goes, well, hey, man, if you can bunny hop up that curb, I'll give you a jersey. And I went to bunny hop up the curb, didn't quite make it, flat spotted my 120 gauge wheel. And I said to myself, years later, I went, that guy was no dummy. Instead of sponsoring me, he got my dad to buy me a new wheel because I messed it up, bunny hopping up onto the curb, So... But what was Sandy like to ride for as a team manager and like that?
Let's see. At that age when I was first on the team, he was always kind of the brains of the team for the most part, especially the marketing part. If you want to go with the Diamondback part of it, I mean, he did some stuff for Torker too. And remember, that's when he kind of yanked over his riders from the Torker team over to the Diamondback team. But for Diamondback, he was more of the liaison. He was the guy with the brains behind thinking of the names for some of these bicycles. Silver Streak, Formula One, Turbo Light, the Turbo Leary. What other bikes that were there beforehand? I don't remember. The Senior Pro, all of those other things. I mean, that was all basically his thinking, I'm pretty sure of, and that's kind of he made Diamondback a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Sandy at the races, and years later when Tim and I worked for ABA, and he was always really hands-on, really involved, and it seemed like it. And
he was, as I recall too, because I had to deal with everybody. As soon as I went to work for ABA, I had to deal with all those manufacturers. Okay. And let's just say I don't have good memories from many of them. But from Sandy, I have great memories of Sandy Finkleman. And he remembered me, and years later, he was selling stuff on eBay, and I bought a whole bunch of like vintage decals from him that he had. Do you remember when he was selling stuff on eBay? He had like an eBay account, and this was early on in eBay.
I heard about that. I wasn't really in contact with him. I wasn't really involved in the old school BMX stuff that was kind of taking off at that time. I knew about it eventually. I started hearing these things like, how much
we're
money
talking like 20 years ago or more. But when I was working at ABA, he was easy to work with.
Yeah. I mean, he had a warehouse behind his shop at that time, and up in the rafters, he had all kinds of old school stuff in there. I call it stuff now. But he had I can't imagine how many of those riders he had back in the mid 70s, late 70s that broke those R&Rs and Scorchers. Because I think there were
gosh,
there must have been close to 100 of them sitting up in the rafters, all broke.
I was one of the R&R breakers.
Yeah, see, and if people don't know about it, R&R is like the precursor before Diamondback.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's if you look at the the bike before Diamondback, it was the R&R.
I'll be darned.
And now, as we make this transition to the next part, you had a full ride with Torker. It was kind of like a co-op thing with Wheels and Things at Torker. Then you went into a full ride. But then, as you had mentioned earlier, everything transitioned over to Diamondback. And when was that? Like 1980?
Yeah, I think that was right. About 1980, somewhere in there.
And so you rode for Diamondback for nearly a decade then, right?
Yeah, 8 years with them and 5 years prior. So I only raced for 13 years, which in today's day and age is nothing. You think about it, people have a pro career now, 13, 15 years easily.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. It's a lot. It seems like a long time back then, but at the same time, nowadays that's nothing. 13 years in BMX is nothing.
But you know what? I think every sport has that transition. Look at pro football players. What the guys that were in the 60s and the 70s versus what it is now, and pro baseball players.
Mm-hmm.
Golfers. Everything has a transition, and it has that elevation.
Well, how old were you you said 1988 when you were done?
So how old figure out the math. 88, I had to be like 23.
Yeah, I mean that's super young.
That's young.
But yeah. I can remember at that time when riders were getting to about mid-20s. Everyone thought, well, they're washed up, and it's time for them to be done.
Yeah,
like Brad was saying, and now pros are still going strong in their mid-30s.
For a lot of guys, 1988 was kind of the year that all the budgets got cut.
That's what I was going to say.
Juvenile bicycles, BMX racing part of it transitioned over to the freestyle part of it, and it was not a good time for somebody to be a pro at 88 in the 88, 89, 90. I don't know what happened in the 90s, because it seemed like they did good again in the 90s, I guess. I don't know. But I don't know if anything will ever compare between 1983 to 86, 87. The growth in the BMX racing part of it was it was fun.
Well, that was like a golden era, because as you said, there were tracks everywhere. There were guys. Yeah. I mean, everybody we talked to raced BMX at one time, or at least had a BMX bike. And so a pro like yourself could influence all those purchases, whether they raced or not. If they just rode around in a dirt lot or rode to school, Eddy King and Harry Leary could influence what bike they bought, and that's what made it so special, not to mention the visual appeal of, what Oz was doing with BMX Action and taking you guys to a whole different level with jumping Porsches and doing these great photo shoots that made it bigger than life. It wasn't just race coverage.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. Because some of the people that I talked to, they knew exactly what day of the month that the new Action or Plus was going to be at the 7-Eleven store. And a lot of times they would sit there, I guess, and wait for that magazine to come in there and drop, and that was kind of like the Holy Bible, I guess, for a lot of kids, especially. And the funny thing is all that stuff that's in the magazines is 90 days old.
Right. Exactly.
There's a lot of stuff that's happened already that's not in the magazines yet. So
that's why in the Midwest, whatever cool bike parts we were running and everything, we're 3 months behind where the technology really was.
Kind of, sort of. You're right.
But now I have a question. I went on the web today, and I mentioned this to Tim. I could not find a listing of everybody who was ever awarded a NORA Cup by Bicycle Motocross Action. You can find the new one that they started in the 90s. But now, did you or Harry ever have the NORA Cup?
No.
It eluded you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I don't
even think I finished in the top 3 ever. You know, Harry may have came close and gotten second or something. Maybe
I did see one where there was a magazine I had that Harry was second, right behind Greg Hill, the year Greg won.
I think there's some politics in winning the NORA Cup sometimes.
You think?
I don't know. Something about that.
Diamondback was a big advertiser. Come on.
Exactly. I mean, now you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think the NORA Cup was a impartial panel of, non-manufacturer voters or something. So
it's much like many things.
I only think there's probably about 3 or 4 people that are on that decision list, making the decision of NORA Cup.
Yeah.
And one of them might have been a cat. I don't know.
You're right. Where'd the paw go, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, that was another thing when we talk about that magic fairy dust of those years, because the NORA Cup was made up. But it was something that everybody talked about, and everybody, it was like, man, I want to win a NORA Cup, because it was one more accolade. I mean, but you yourself, you were named as one of the fastest AMs in the world, called the Terrible 10 in 1983 by BMXA.
82.
And
that was 82.
Was it 82?
Yeah, because I turned pro at 83.
He passed the test, Tim. See, I told you if I said 83, he'd know better than us, which is right.
Actually,
no, that's what we want to know. We want to know when it's right.
Did you know your Wikipedia page? You must have hired a professional scriptwriter. It's like 9 pages long.
No way. 9 pages? You must be using big fonts.
No, it's not. It
says cool. The very last entry is woo. So
really
woo. But Pro Rookie of the Year in 83, is that year correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And in 89, as you were exiting, you were awarded the ABA Hall of Fame of BMX award. So you were named in the ABA BMX Hall of Fame.
That's a little premature, because I passed up some guys in there I was ahead of Perry Kramer, and who else? There's some other guys behind me that should have gone before me. But
Tim and I talk about that all the time, how we're not named yet. What the hell? So,
yeah.
The thing is, you talk about politics, all of these things, whether you go to a car show and judges are choosing your car, or you go to the NORA Cup, or you go to the Hall of Fame, it's no matter what sport it is, there's always a little bit of, why you were chosen, when you were chosen. And I'm sure with your retirement, you were recognized because it was like, hey, wow, Eddy's retiring. Let's get him in there. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that was deserving. Yeah, I mean, like, if you even look at your career before you were even 15 or 16 years old, I mean, yeah.
And Ed, from afar, from a distance, from me looking, and I know Tim and I have talked about this, I think the other thing is that there were some other things that benefited your career. One was your name. I mean, come on, King, that's a great name, because, Fanshawe doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well as King does, and you can't have King Edward and, things like that. And that's really cool. But I think it was also the way you portrayed yourself. You always came off very professional. You always came off very methodical. And you also seemed to be very focused with your training and things like that, to try and be the best rider you could. And and I think all those things come together.
Well, during that era, it was still so new, and and whatever I was doing at home was kind of secretive. Maybe the only one that might know what was going on or anything would be my brother.
Yeah.
And even to the point where when he turned pro, I was like, yeah, I probably need to go riding again and not tell him about it. Or, go hit gates and maybe I won't tell him about it. I don't know.
So you mean you're training what you did to stay?
Yeah. Because he knew he knows all the stuff.
Yeah.
At that time we're still living together. It's nothing's even, it's an open book for the most part, and if I win, he wins. He wins, I win. It's all good.
It's, I always go back to motorsports and the reason there are 2-car teams, they can share data and they can share all of that information, so it's, you can, if you have somebody else's eyes on the ball, it's much, better. So,
gosh, I feel bad because when Brad and I were teammates, he held everything back. He was very secretive.
I was very secretive of how to get 8th place. It was.
Me and Harry would talk all the time about the starting gates. What we could find out that'd be a little bit different between the two of us. As far as what the height of the pedal at the time, what position on the gate favors getting to that first turn first. So, we would talk about that.
Did you train together? Did you and Harry train together?
Nah, he lived up in, he was 2 hours away.
Okay.
I'm down in San Diego doing my own thing.
He was up, I think like in Linwood or something, wasn't he?
Well, Glendora for the most part.
Oh, Glendora. Okay. So that was a ways. That'd be a long ways.
Plus there's too much smog up there for me in traffic.
Especially back then.
I'm not going up there.
So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about your relationship with Harry and being a teammate for so long with him. But I have one last thing to talk about because this was something that I always wondered and we've never talked about. But that was the event that I put on with Scott Bryhop at the Tramway in Palm Springs, our gravity-powered vehicle. This was coming off. Everybody was going to do Formula One racing, Formula One bikes. Remember that fiasco? And we did that at like Long Beach at Interbike, and they had so few people registered that I had to go out and race in a pair of blue jeans and a button-down shirt, and so they could make a race. But we got into the GPV racing. Now, you got injured there, didn't you?
Yeah. That was 2 weeks prior to, I think, the Murray World Cup.
Oh, really? It was that close.
So it was not a good decision to do that at all.
Did you break your hand? Is that how I remember it?
Yeah.
So tell us what happened there. I mean, that was
I don't know. It was just one of those things that I've gone up that tram to go to the tram to the top of Palm Springs. Actually, just last year, I think we went there. Me and Patty did. And I don't think I ever told her the story. Maybe she knows about it. I don't know. Maybe I've said it, but I mean, I've been up that way before after that crash and just sat there and just said, what was I thinking? Yeah, I had no business doing that. It was just a bad call, 2 weeks before the biggest race of the year. And, mentally and physically, I thought I was in great shape. I mean, I still tried to race that weekend, and there was no way I could do it. There was too much pain in my hand.
Well, let me ask you this about it, because I've talked to some other riders that came out for that, and did you realize just how damn fast it was going to be? I mean, no. I think a lot of people didn't.
No, I kept thinking to myself, what happens if I get the speed wobbles at about 75 miles an hour, and basically I slide in and I smash myself into that boulder? I probably am going to die.
And you still did it.
Yeah, well,
the only guy crazier than the riders was my cameraman, who sat backwards on the motorcycle with the camera, having to go 100 miles an hour to stay in front of everybody, and that guy was nuts. He had the trust of I don't even know what, but Pat was an awesome camera guy, and he did lots of crazy stuff. But I just wanted to ask you about that, because I remember that event. We did the half pipe up there. We did all the stuff, and I knew you got injured. I didn't realize it was so close to a big event like that. That's too bad.
Bad decision.
Well, I shouldn't have brought it up then, I guess. But
so much for that story.
Part of history. It's a good story.
Yeah, that's a downer.
Now, Eddy, when when we spoke about, when Tim and I spoke to you about having you on the show, we contacted you and said we'd love to have you on and talk about your history like we're doing here. But one of the things that that you brought up, and I thought was really nice, was that you said you really wanted to talk about Harry and kind of let us know about how he was as a teammate and as a racer and some of the things, because here we have a guy who is such a big part of the sport. He was a big name in the sport. He was, visually. When I think Harry Leary, I of course think of his trademark, Leary, look back and his cross up, and But I know you had a lot of reasons why you really wanted to talk about him, and I think that's great, because he was a teammate and a friend of yours. So where do you want to start?
Well, when he passed away in September, I think I made a post about something about I was going to let this sink in and let it, mature a little. Not mature. I can't think of the word. Before I wanted to comment about it or anything, and I never really got to comment about it before things just got kind of out of hand and the whole 9 yards. And everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion about something. About this sport, and he's a very, huge figure in the sport. In my thinking of him, I look at him as one of the guys that's basically on the Mount Rushmore of BMX. You got David Clinton, Stu Thompson, Brent Patterson, and I'd throw Harry on there, because all those guys got number ones except for Harry. But Harry's like the cover boy king.
Yeah.
I think he's got 3 times as much covers as the next guy. So I mean, I look at him as that's how big of a figure he is, whether you like him or you don't like him for whatever it was. But he's a very difficult person to nail down, as far as everything that goes on with him, because I knew him in a different aspect, because we travel all the time, and if it wasn't just the two of us that would go to a race as pros, it was, the whole team. I mean, during our heyday, we were gone 40 weekends out of the year one year, 40 out of the 52. So that's 3 out of the 4 weekends, and I kept telling everybody, we basically just come home to wash our clothes and get right back on a plane and go to the next race, because we weren't able.
It's just like working at the ABA.
So. Yeah, I mean, we'd leave on Friday, and unfortunately, we don't leave until Monday, and so you get to know these people as your teammates more than you do the people you go to school with. I think even my father was like, he almost felt like, Sandy is my manager, was more of a father figure than he was at the time, because we were gone so much. We traveled so much all the time. And a lot of times when you get home, you're just so exhausted, you just don't want to talk about it anymore. You just want to go home and, hit the reset button and just relax on there. So being that being the case, I mean, you live, I saw Harry more often than I probably saw my brother, at
Now,
times.
what was the age difference between you guys?
Harry, let's see, he just turned 66, 5.5 years.
Okay. So it would be like a big brother, somebody that was, yeah.
Yeah. And we got along perfect. I mean, it was never, not once was there ever any competition or animosity. It was just basically, you do good, that means I win. If I do good, that means you win. It was a team thing, and all our job was to win. It didn't matter whoever was doing it. And that ESPN series in '83 with Rennie Roker, I mean, we did pretty good some of the times there, and we got 1-2 at Johnstown. I picked up the win at Waterford. Harry did okay. That was a tough series, but
those are fun to watch. Those races are some of my favorite things to watch.
That's 1983 when cable networks booming. ESPN's still a baby on cable networks, and MTV. So people were glued to 24-hour sports, and for Rennie to put BMX on ESPN, I mean, that was like a whole different level of exposure.
Yeah, it took it to a whole new place. It
That
legitimized it in a way.
That might have been one of the best things for BMX was that series.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's no, there isn't, all these other sports, there isn't frisbee golf, there isn't pickleball that you see on ESPN now, and all this other stuff. There wasn't too much. There was the big 4 or 5 sports, and they threw in a little BMX, and that was like, holy cow,
Yeah.
It was huge.
And you both did good. I remember watching, the races you mentioned, and those Diamondbacks were out front quite often.
So you mentioned earlier that you guys shared a lot of, insight and, how the gate position. How's that first turn? Is that rut in the first turn? You go high or do you go low under it? All those types of things.
Yeah.
And, how did that work? And what I mean by that is, Tim and I, having been at every single national practically over the years, and, guys would come up to us and go, man, is anything going to rake that turn? It's horrible. But I mean, you guys had to handle it in a whole different way, because at the same time you were trying to figure out the first turn, you also had to promote the company and do autograph signings and have people come up to you, and you had to have your head on there. So how did that all impact everything?
As you can tell, I think back in the 80s, we gave away our equipment. Nowadays, I don't think they really do that. I mean, there's an iconic picture of Harry, I think, sitting there at the finish line at the NBL Grands, and there must be like 30 or 40 kids out there with their hands out, either wanting his gloves, or his goggles, or his number plate. It's a cool picture, but you don't see that now on that type of level at all, whether it be an Olympian or anything else. It's not so pure. Let's just say it's just not at that level. I wish they could ever experience what it was like back then, because it was cool.
Now, one of the things about Harry is it seemed like he was kind of plagued with injuries, where like he would be on a run, he'd have, really, really going for it, and then all of a sudden he'd have a knee injury or something like that. I mean, am I right in that, or is that, something that?
I don't know. I mean, he did, I think, maybe had an injury or two here and there, but I don't think for the most part, most guys really get injured like they do now. I mean, now when they go down and they get hurt, man, if they don't get up quickly or, within reason and on their own power, usually they're going to be down for a while. So, I mean, I don't think injuries were too much of a big effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back in the 80s, not like they are today. Today
His
is scary.
Wikipedia page talks about some injuries, but they weren't, it's not a long list. There's like 3 injuries, but I tell you what, I mean, I didn't want to jump in too much, but one Harry Leary story I've got is that man could ride while he was in pain, man. I don't know if you knew about these races, but at Rockford every year they had what was called like the 30 and over. I forget what they called it, but it wasn't like Vet Pro, but it was a special race they did at Rockford like 20 years ago for several years. And it was called like something like the 50 and over open. And Harry was still a Vet Pro at that time.
Yeah.
And this Friday night race before the Nationals was like a big event. Like all former pros and top amateurs would race. And man, I remember he was at the top of that thing, and he was racing with like a bad hand or something. It was taped up, and he was a lion, man. Back in the day when I knew him, and even as an older rider.
I joked with him recently. I can't remember, a few years ago. I think probably the Winter Nationals at Black Mountain. I called this class, I guess, whatever it was, 60 and over, or 55 and over, the cruiser class. I call it the paint drying class, because it was like watching paint dry. I would tell him, I said, it's like watching Dunn Edwards and Sherwin-Williams and all these guys look like I know they think they're going fast, but to tell you the truth, man, it's like visually you're not going that fast. So I always call it
fast. It feels
it
fast.
does. It does. No, I'm sure it does. But I call it the paint drying class, just for shits and giggles,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been maybe 4 or 5 years since I raced modern BMX, and it's like I knew that if I went to a big national, I would have to race Harry Leary, and that would be hard to do. You know what I mean? Because he went all out, 110% the whole time, every time.
Yeah. Now he's wired differently.
Yeah.
Even some people would say that he was more intense later in his days than he was when he was really a pro. I mean, he was just that mindset. But there's a lot of things about Harry that that haven't been talked about or discussed, I think, and we can talk about that all night long regarding my thoughts and of the things I think people need to know.
Well, I know that his sister had some information about his passing and things like that, and you were really generous in helping us get in touch with her so that we could talk to her, because who would know better than someone from his immediate family, and we were able to get her on a call, and let's just take a look at that right now. So we've been talking with Ed, Tim, and Ed was so nice to try and put us in touch with Linda Taylor, as Harry Leary's sister, and we have her right now. Welcome to Super Rad BMX, Linda.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, honestly.
Hello, Linda.
Hello there. Very nice to meet both of you.
Nice to meet you as well.
So you're in Lake Havasu City, and
yes.
And you mentioned that was someplace that Harry lived for a long time, and so it's kind of like hometown.
Right, it is hometown. He actually lived here at my house for a number of years, and then he had his own house out here, and then he moved to Phoenix, and his retirement plan was to move back here and just retire here, because he loved it here. Absolutely loved it here.
It's a great place. It's Lake Havasu. I've spent many times there with my boat, and
yeah.
And I remember driving in and out of town. There was a BMX track right there on the what is that? The south side of town there?
Yeah, at Sarah's Park. Harry
Yeah.
ran that track for a short while, and then he also ran the one out in Kingman for a while as well. So he, as far as I know, he ran 3 different tracks. He had one in Rancho Cucamonga back in the 90s, I think, that he ran. So yeah, he was here for a while, then moved to Phoenix, and was ultimately going to move back here.
Well, that is the thing about Harry Leary, is that he really was a hardcore BMXer and immersed himself into every aspect, whether it was racing or running tracks or working at companies, everything. He truly was all immersed in the world of bicycle motocross, BMX, bikes, everything like that. And it was just such a blow and a tragedy, to hear of his passing, because when we saw Harry, we would always remember the Diamondback era, and
Of course.
taking
Yeah.
the photo shoots with him that we did, and seeing him at the races. And Tim, talk a little bit about how you actually encountered him, in the when you were still racing and like that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, of course, he was one of the first people we saw, in bicycle motocross newspaper. We were in the Midwest, and it always took a month or two to find out what was going on in California. But my first memories of your brother are, pictures of him winning races on JMC. And
MC, that goes way back.
It goes way back. And then the pro class, he was part of a small group of guys that created the pro class. And there was a sticker, and it was, red and blue and white sticker, and it said pro on it. And, he would wear that on his visor. And so the short story is, I saw that, my friends and I saw that, and we were convinced we wanted to be pros. And so I joined this association. I got the pro sticker. And from 79 to 80, we traveled out of our Midwest circle and went to traveled the national circuit, and found out how fast Harry Leary really was.
Did you? Yes, I guess. Yeah.
We would try to make the main event in the pro class, and every now and then we would, but I can remember more than one time where it was Harry Leary who passed me in a turn, or it was Harry Leary who beat me by 1 point to transfer to the main event. And so, he was an early hero of mine and of Brad. That was phase 1, but phase 2 was when we were magazine editors. We got to do articles on the Diamondback team and stories about Harry Leary, and Brad did photo shoots for the magazines with Harry. And then phase 3, in my 40s, I started racing again. This would be the early 2000s.
Good for
and
you.
Come to find out, there's Harry Leary, and he's never quit. I quit for 2 years, and here's your brother. And not only is he racing, but he's still racing vet pro at that time, and winning and making majors.
Yeah.
So there was that whole phase of Harry, and I never got to race him again. But we would banter back and forth a little bit on the internet. Like he saw that I went and raced like this Yamaha motorbike behind me, and at an event. Well, he had raced a Yamaha motorbike down at the Guy Cooper race one year, and there's pictures of him, that are all over the internet racing that old Yamaha motorbike. And he would tease me about like lining up on the gate with me, on these Yamaha motorbikes. And, I was looking forward to seeing him again. I really was. And
I'm sorry you did not get to see him again.
Now, Linda, how long has it been now? What's the exact timeline since he passed?
It'll be 8 months, the 7th of this month.
Okay.
Wow.
I knew it was coming up, and I wasn't sure the exact date.
Yeah, I keep track of the days. It's been a tough one.
it's never easy losing anyone, especially a family member and someone who, like Harry, that had an impact on so many people all around the world. I'm sure that makes it a little tougher because people are coming up to you and talking about reminiscing and talking about things. And it's, how does that feel for someone? And I want to kind of get a little bit into his family and what he was like as a kid and like that.
Oh, sure. I'll tell you, it's been difficult since Harry died going on Facebook, social media, and looking at all the things that people, the wonderful things that people were saying about him, the history, the fact that he was everybody's hero, that who he was. I mean, who he was is who Harry really was in life. I mean, he was aggressive, yes, but that aggression helped him become who he was. He had drive like nobody I've ever seen.
He was very focused, wasn't he?
Oh, he was very focused. Even at a young age, his first wheels was a little horse that had wheels, and he couldn't even walk when he was on it. And then he moved to a bike and learned how to ride. And at five years old, my mother was telling me he was riding his bike and he went to jump something, endowed over the handlebars. The back of his head came down on the handlebars where the screw nut is on top.
Oh, sure. God.
And knocked himself out. My mom went to pick him up. He was bleeding through his ear. Got him to the hospital. He had a skull fracture.
Oh, my goodness.
He was in the hospital for 7 days.
And this was at what age?
At 5 years old. That was his first injury, head injury. And it was a bad one. Back then, I don't, medicine but they did tell my mother to make sure he stayed inactive for 6 months. And if you know Harry, there was no way Harry was going to stay inactive. So that, was his first head injury was back then. And he was all about his bikes. He would bring his bikes into the house, and much to my mother and my father's dismay, bringing those bikes in, and there were nicks on the doorway, nicks on the wall. He was forever changing the look of his bike. He would sand it down, he would paint it, he'd put stickers on it. And let me tell you, nobody ever touched his bike. You just don't touch Harry's bikes. And I found that out the hard way. I stole his bike one time, and I was bruised for quite some time after that on the arm. Yes. But Harry and I had a great relationship. We grew up, we were very close, very, very close. Through the years, we stayed close. He taught me how to ride a motorcycle. We did a lot of motorcycle camping. He taught my kids how to ride BMX. And motorcycle riding and racing. My daughter raced and Harry helped her with that. So, he's always been in my life. He's just, as a fan, he was always focused on BMX. When he figured out, through high school, he was always on a bike. And when he started working at a bike shop, that was when he found BMX. That was when he realized, this is what I'm going to do. And there was a track, the firemen out there in the Covina Hills, Glendora area, the kids were getting into trouble on their bikes. So they decided, and they're riding those little banana seat Stingrays. Remember those? And then they were turning those into little BMX racers. So the fire department decided to build a track out there. And that's when Harry first started racing and started winning nonstop. He became extremely popular then. He was popular in high school too, but once he started racing, that's all he wanted to do. That was it. He was so competitive that in metal shop, he built a bike that he jumped off the roof of houses. I don't know if you guys knew that.
Didn't hear that story, but many of us did those kind of crazy things. Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Well, he made a pair of metal shoes in metal shop. And I don't know if you guys remember Irwindale Raceway.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, he and his buddy Pete Collins strapped these shoes on, and they did 80 miles an hour being drugged behind a car around that track on those shoes. So
Like
he's
a
always,
stuntman.
oh yeah, no, he's always done stuff like that. So, once he started racing back then, there were no helmet rules. There was nothing, no gear, no protective gear, nothing like that. And so, he came off all the time. And I was there at one of his first races that somebody took him out on a turn. He picked his bike up and he met that person at the next turn and threw his bike at him and knocked the guy down. So that was who he was. And he was known, that's how he got the name Scary Harry Leary, was because he did have a temper. And he always, if you took him out, you were going to get paid back. And he always paid back. Always. So, but then I'm getting ahead of myself. Once he started working for JMC, and that was it. That was his life, was BMX. And then Diamondback came along, and that's when the family kind of lost touch with Harry, because he became famous and he was gone. He never, he was gone all the time.
He was on the road, right?
Right. Flying here, flying there, and getting into trouble with Eddy King quite often, from what I understand. Those two and rental cars, there's some stories there you might ask Eddy about.
Yeah. Well, I think he was traveling so much, and he went to Europe, and then I think he's still has the most magazine covers of any rider.
Does he really? I believe that.
I think that might be true, but of BMX action, I believe he has the most covers, or is right up there. I'll have to do some research on that.
Yeah, I would like to know the answer to that one, but
that'd be interesting. Yeah.
But he kind of lost touch with his family.
Now, Linda, does he have other brothers and sisters?
I have a younger sister.
Okay.
So
he had two sisters.
Yes.
Okay.
And then my mother and my father. My dad passed about 7 years ago. And Harry and I lost touch when he first started racing. But then he came back and he married, he had a son and divorced her and then remarried and had a daughter. So he does have 2 children. Through it all, we remained very close. And Harry had his dogs, his golden retrievers. I sent you a couple pictures of those.
I saw those. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a story with the girl Shelley. She was virtually Harry's wife. She died of pancreatic cancer.
I remember Shelley. I met her.
Do you remember? Oh, she was an amazing gal. But
yeah, I met her in Rockford, Illinois, when Harry was racing there in Vet Pro. Yeah.
Yeah, she was amazing. And she died at a young age. I think she was 51. But before she passed, they bred their 2 golden retrievers, and they had, I think, 12 puppies. And she made sure that all of her friends and family got a puppy as her legacy. And I got a puppy, and she was 15, and she just died 6 months ago. She was the last of the litter.
Oh,
so it was bittersweet.
That's hard.
Very much
I can imagine. That's horrible. Dogs become such a part of our lives, and we get so attached to them. And
they're like family for sure.
Oh, heck yes, heck yeah.
Are you about the same? Are you and Harry close in age then?
We're 18 months apart.
Okay.
So yeah, we were always getting into trouble together, and my sister was sick when she was born, so my mom kind of spent a lot of time with her. So my brother and I, we kind of just stayed together and hung out together. We did a lot of camping with my dad, motorcycles, horses, anything with 2 wheels or 4 legs. I mean, that's what we did. He wasn't too fond of horses. I think he liked being in control. When you're on a horse, you really aren't in control unless they want you to be.
They want you to think you are sometimes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say. So we talked a little bit about his family and growing up, and you mentioned a serious head injury when he was 5. And one of the things that we've learned as a society over the past, really about the past 3 decades, it started coming on, but in the last 2 decades, even more, is we've seen people like professional sports players, like, footballers and other people that have suffered from repetitive head injuries. And in speaking with you earlier, you think that Harry was someone who really probably suffered numerous traumas to his head.
Most definitely. I actually have in my possession one of his helmets that looked like it went through the ringer. Eddy told me a story where Harry hit head on a pole going around a turn at a race and hit the pole. He had a helmet on, but were you guys aware of that race? That particular
I'm not. No.
I know that story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was that at, Tim? Do you remember?
I don't remember where it was at. I would have to think hard about it, but it was talked about. It was talked about in the publications, I believe, too, at the time.
Oh, yeah, because he hit hard. So through the years, I remember him. I asked him, well, how'd you do it? And he goes, oh, I fell and knocked myself out. Like it was no big deal. And, I knew that he would fall because he was so aggressive. And he fell, on his motorcycle, on his BMX bike. So, yeah, I truly believe, because, I've done a little bit of research on CTE, and I understand now that the only way to seriously see if somebody had it is to do an autopsy on the brain. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way that you can diagnose it 100%. But we did not do that because at the time, we weren't really thinking along those lines. We were more or less in shock, for one. And for another, that was like the furthest thing from our minds was the CTE. Yeah. But looking back and having done some research since then, all the signs were there. I mean, everything about it, the aggression, the mood swings, the anger, the behavioral problems. Because, he'd be up here 1 second and then down here the next. And, he was paranoid a lot of the time. And, we just didn't understand. We didn't understand why he would be so angry all of a sudden and why his relationships, he never lasted with women. And I truly believe that it started in his 30s. And I think up until this happened, he had it. And, Eddy even thought so, because I did see some changes, recently since I had last seen him, and looking this up, they're saying that the median death age is anywhere from 60 to 69 for people who have CTE, because
so it's almost cumulative. It just gets worse over time.
It gets worse. It never gets better. It's a disease. It gets worse. And ultimately you end up with dementia, which you end up with no body function. You don't think, you can't, no cognitive thoughts, muscle tremors, almost like a Parkinson's disease kind of thing. Now, I never noticed that's the last stage. I noticed stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. There's like 4 stages of it. And I think Harry was coming into his last stage of it. But having done all this research, I can look back on Harry's life and think, wow, if I would have known this, maybe we could have helped him. Maybe we could have done something to where he could get help. But it's just, and it's not just the first head injury. It's a progressive thing where it's constant. You have a concussion, and you don't even need to get a concussion. You could just fall and hit your head, and it still causes the CTE to get worse. And it comes on. It never goes away. There's no cure, none.
Well, and this is one of those things, as I said, we've learned so much, all of us as a society, more, you look back at all of these sports that, we used to, I mean, when I started racing BMX, you mentioned how, in the early days it was, kind of like, yeah, helmets kind of, it's recommended, Well, my mom and dad went and bought my first helmet with S&H green stamps. And,
I remember those. Oh my gosh.
yeah, we went into the green stamp store and got it. And I mean, it was a plastic helmet. It had a visor on it. It looked cool, but it wasn't like when the next one, when I got a Bell helmet and it was a real helmet, I realized, wow, that other one wasn't doing a whole lot.
It wasn't doing anything, honestly. It really
Yeah,
wasn't.
it was more like a fashion statement. Like, yeah, I got a helmet, and
So you probably looked pretty cool when you wore it, huh?
And now the football helmets all are so sophisticated because they have membranes inside the helmet that like move inside the helmet. There's so much more to it than even the helmets we had in the 70s.
Well, and you having said that, I feel that the BMX world needs to take CTE a little more seriously. They need to start looking at the athletes, maybe implementing something in their own helmets to help with the percussions of when they do fall. Something needs to be done, because this didn't just happen to Harry.
No,
it's happened to
obviously.
a lot of riders. And now that society knows more about it, there's no way you can just turn your head and not do anything about it. There's young kids out there racing now. Parents need to be made aware of what could possibly happen. It's a dangerous sport. It really is. And they're getting faster and faster.
My mom and even my daughters, who are now in their 30s, would say things to me over time, and they weren't kidding either. They were like, "Dad, I think you've hit your head too many times." I mean, it was kind of an ongoing thing, and we all did, but all it takes is one or two, really bad ones. But I'd get migraines, and Brad.
That's one of the very
Brad's brother took me to the hospital.
Things are headaches, and Harry always complained about headaches.
Did he have migraines, or just?
Yes. Not migraines, but headaches. He always had headaches. And that's like one of the very first things that came on. And now I see the progress, and I see all the signs. And if I could go back 8 months, I would have them do the autopsy on the brain to see if that was the case. But
as you said, that's a very difficult decision to make right immediately after.
You can't beat yourself up on that, because you were in shock.
Right.
Your brother was gone. You don't think, there's a lot of things you don't really like. You don't think about those kinds of things. And
no, it was a shock to me. The police showed up at my house and asked if I knew who Harry Leary was. And I said, well, yeah, that's my brother. And they told me he was deceased. And
Linda, what were the circumstances? Sorry. Because there's been a lot of conjecture and a lot of, armchair, people that, and set it straight so that everyone, does know what happened with Harry.
Well, they found him on a Saturday, which was the 7th. However, I believe he was there. That was not the day of death, but they're putting that as the day of death. And the time of death is when they found him, which is inaccurate. I believe he passed on Thursday.
Really?
Simply because when they found him, they got a wee tip. And when they found him, he was unrecognizable because he'd been in the car for so long. He was in his car. And the car itself was out of gas, and the battery was dead, which led me to believe that he pulled over to get some sleep, left the air going, left the car going, and the lights on. And I believe he didn't wake up. And they told us when they first got Harry in, on Sunday, they called us and said he died from extreme heat exhaustion, which I believe that was the thing that killed him. However, when they did the autopsy, there was a couple of other things that did come to light. And I do want to mention the fact that his bike that he never ever let out of his sight, someone took it out of his car, out of a dead man's vehicle. We since got the bike back, though.
Oh,
we do have the bike.
I'm glad you got it back. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been something we've been chasing around.
Was it stolen and then someone else found it and turned it in, or?
I believe that the person that did the wee tip took it out of his car. That's what I believe.
I'm sorry, what did you say? The person that did the
wee tip, they called the police and told them that there was somebody passed in a vehicle. So tipped the police off. And I believe that the person that did that took his bike out of the car.
Wow.
Wow.
And you were able to get it back through talking to people, or just did they bring it back, or what?
Oh no. He tried to sell it on Facebook.
Okay.
And whenever anybody that was affiliated with BMX at all that would inquire about it, he'd disappear. He would disappear. So then they set up a sting for him. And this was only a month ago.
Awful.
This
is awful.
That recent.
Just awful.
Yeah. Well,
people are awful. I mean, who does that?
Exactly. The person that would do something like that, karma will get them. I totally believe in karma, but
yeah.
They set it up to where a woman inquired over it, met the guy at a Walmart, and then had the police there. So we got the bike back, which to me, when I found out his bike wasn't in his car, I was devastated. Only because I knew.
I can imagine. That was him. That was
him. Exactly. Yeah. It was his car. And I mean, I had to go to his car the next day and empty it out. Then I went to his apartment hoping that the bike was there, but it wasn't. So, but then the guy started putting it up a month later.
Wow.
He had it on some site. I don't remember the name of the site, trying to figure out how much the bike was worth. And then people were telling him, hey, that bike's stolen. You need to return that to them.
It was obviously his bike because everyone knew his bike. And everyone knew I'm not going to say what kind of bike it was, but everyone knows what kind of bike what brand it was.
And there was a way he was going to be able to sell it to anybody that knew who Harry was, because it was Harry's bike. So that all played out very well. But we got we had an autopsy done. It came back, the death certificate came back. Now, I want to, before I go any further with this, I want to state the fact that part of CTE was misuse of drugs.
Okay.
Harry in no way, shape, or form was a drug addict. He, however, did use drugs recreationally. If he had been an addict, there's no way Harry could have become the legend that he is. He could not have trained. He could not have raced. He could not have done any of the things that he did. I believe that it was a problem. Anytime anybody uses drugs, it's a problem.
Sure.
And Harry and I were aware of it. And at the time, I wasn't sure what was happening. However, the death certificate came back, and it did show a methamphetamine in his bloodstream. It did show fentanyl. So I still do not believe that is what killed him ultimately. Possibly it could have. He could have fallen asleep and never woke up. You know, the fentanyl's totally new. I think the meth was laced with it, but it wasn't something Harry did all the time. He used recreationally.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe once every 4, 5, 6 months. But this is something, when we found out, I was like, well, everybody thinks it's heat exhaustion, but Eddie knew the truth. His close friends knew the truth. Family member. We just didn't want to put it out there yet because, I know that there's been rumors that he was using. A lot of people said that he was using a lot, but I know for a fact he was not. I believe that his issues that he had came from the CTE, and I believe that is what triggered ultimately him trying to deal with his life the way, with the depression, the anger, the apathy, all of that is a contributing factor for CTE. I believe that, people drink to help self-medicate. Unfortunately, that night or that day, whenever he did use meth, and it was laced with fentanyl.
Well, you did hit a very valid point, which is there are people that drink, there are people that use drugs, but someone who regularly abuses them, you can see it in their physicality. And
exactly.
and in Harry, you could see that, right up to he was physical specimen. He was in very good shape. He was toned. He was, it wasn't to an extreme to where, I would have never guessed it, and
Nobody
so I
ever
think
did.
That speaks volumes.
And
yeah, I
the
mean,
autopsy,
half of his Facebook posts were, is riding his bicycle to the gym. I mean,
exactly.
He trained more than anyone. My friends and I were like, we need to train like Harry Leary trains,
Oh, he trained. His training was off the charts.
Now, Linda, kind of on the same vein, going back to the CTE, could there be also some effects that could be laced back to judgmental, making bad judgment calls, just like with the anger issues and things like that?
That's part of CTE.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was asking. Yeah.
Your judgment calls are screwed up. You make decisions that normally you would have not made a decision like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just all points to that. And I just want to be clear on the fact that Harry was not a drug addict. Yes, he used, and yes, unfortunately, it did show up in the autopsy. However, the autopsy itself showed a much, much younger man as far as his liver, his heart was in perfect condition. It even said that he had the physique of a much younger man. So it's because of all that training. It was because of his diet. And he ate well. He trained hard. You can't take away anything from him. He did what
we all make, like Brad said, judgment calls. Like if I had $1 for all my times I've made a bad judgment call, and I'm trying, it's kind of choked up by it. Because
if I can say something, go ahead, Tim. I didn't know you were.
Well, let me just finish this. I've had friends that have passed away from things, this or that. My point is, we're all just one bad judgment call away from something that triggers an event, And if his car shut off while he was sleeping and it's 120 degrees out, we don't know. We're probably never going to know exactly, how that happened. But we all make it. We're human. Okay, we're all human. That's where I'm getting at.
Right.
Yeah. No,
right.
Good point. But one of the most unfortunate things right now is fentanyl. And I have
That
someone else
me.
who has a child who died that I know from the same thing. They weren't a bad kid or anything like that, but something was laced with fentanyl, and you don't know it, and they didn't know it. And what what they took the time before that just gave them a little bit of a high or something, this time killed them. And that's the unfortunate thing. And that's what I think, Linda, it sounds like you're saying, is that this could have been something that one time, somebody who drank had a couple extra, cocktails, but, Harry, did something else. He took drugs, but this time the fentanyl could have been the thing that put it over the top. He fell asleep and never woke back up.
Very, very much so. When I found out fentanyl was in there, that was one of the first things I thought of, because fentanyl has become such a harsh drug, and there's so much of it in the country right now. And, kids are dying left and right from it. And I think what I would like most of all is for Harry's legacy to help parents possibly struggling with kids who are addicted to drugs and are, CTE with these children, to be somebody up here that they can look up to and say, here's this guy who did everything right through all of his training, but he made a mistake. And because he made a mistake, it killed him.
Yeah.
Now, possibly if people see this and they see, wow, this happened to Harry, it could happen to my kid. It could happen to your kid. You just don't know. And with fentanyl is running rampant as it is right now, kids need all the help that they could get, staying away from the drugs. And if what happened to Harry could help anybody, I'm all for it. I really am. I would love for his life to have meaning.
You know how I'm going to position this a little bit, maybe to help our listeners and to help you, Linda, is because it does get you choked up. It makes, all of us, because we think of this person who had such a great life, and, some injury and a mistake could have, taken that. And let's not let it be overshadow everything great that Harry did.
Exactly. And that's what my fear was about coming out with this.
Yeah.
Is it would overshadow. Right. And that's why I wanted to reiterate the fact that there's no way Harry could have become who he is and raced the way he did for as long as he did if he was a drug addict. So, right. He was not. He made a mistake. Was it, we all make mistakes. Like you said, we're all human. But he was dealing with a lot from what I believe the CTE caused. And if you do a little research, it'll show you. I mean, it was just like I could see my brother when I was reading up on it. And even Eddie and I spoke that he was 100% sure Harry had it. But this is, like I said, after the fact. I wish, we don't know, because you can't test for it. The only way you can find out if you have it is to autopsy the brain.
Well, it's very much like some of my best friends are top fuel dragster drivers and funny car drivers. And they, after Dale Earnhardt Sr. Died in that accident in his NASCAR that did not even look that bad, but
right.
they went with the extreme, the Haas device, which limits the movement of their neck side to side and back and forth. And quite honestly, many of my friends who are famous race car drivers, at first it was kind of this macho thing. Well, we don't need that. We don't need that. We don't need that. But then they showed them through things like this, through talking about it, through that they went, am I just being some dumb macho guy who doesn't want to wear this? And now it is religion with them. They would never get in a car without one. And so you do have to talk about it. And I think that's what's so great about you talking about it, Linda, because it'd be very simple for you to kind of fade back and just say, hey, look at the photos of Harry and like that. But Harry was a hero, and he was someone that, kids of many generations looked up to. And right. Sometimes you have to also realize that there are some faults with people too, and you have to understand that and learn from that. And I hope that's I've translated that correctly of what you're trying to make sure everybody understands, because we need people to understand that they've got to watch out for things like fentanyl. And just as a racer who would never even, who wouldn't ever take drugs, there's other things that can affect you very seriously.
There really is. And honestly, you don't know. I mean, you go to a party and you set your water bottle down, you pick it up, it could be laced with something.
Yes.
They just, there needs to be more of an awareness for the CTE for sure, but also drugs in a sport. I truly believe there should be drug testing in BMX, not just on the Olympic level, because I was told that they don't drug test unless it's on the Olympic level. But it might be something that should possibly be implemented that might help people whose kids are, dealing with other things at school, and they come out and they try to race under the influence of something. I don't know. I think where I'm at this point is trying to make my brother's death mean something.
I understand.
Something that go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I understand. That is how you would feel. You lost your brother, and his legacy needs to mean not just Harry Leary, the pro, the hero, but people, if they can learn from any mistake that was made,
Right.
awareness about wearing helmets, it's all positive.
Right. They should never go on a track without a helmet on. I mean, I see kids running out there racing, doing laps without a helmet. Never, ever get on that bike without a helmet. I mean, that should just be, and perhaps start gearing towards a helmet that is made specifically for BMX racing. Something like what you had said that the NFL players have. Mm-hmm. Because they do, they hit their heads hard. And if you knock yourself out with a helmet on, you'd be dead if you didn't have that helmet on.
Oh, they have come a long way. I mean, we talked with Fly Racing a few months back, and he showed me, the internals of the helmets. They have come a long way.
Good. That's good to know.
That as far as the safety items, the helmets have come tremendous lengths. But something we didn't talk about that I'd like to kind of maybe bring it up is, I've known other people in this circumstance, and Eddy and I talked about it, which is fame, which you keep referencing that, Harry became famous and he, didn't see his family as much anymore. And fame can be, especially at a young age, where in his world of BMX, he was famous. People are tugging at you. People want your autograph. People want your photo. Hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? And I've had some friends who have had fame in their industries, and I've talked to them about it. And it can be devastating at times, where they just don't know how to deal with it. Do you see anything there at all, Linda?
I would have to say yes. Because Harry was young. He was growing up, we were very sheltered. We weren't allowed to really, our curfew was when the lights came on, you had to be back in the house. When we were in high school, we had to be home. Oh, remember that? We had to be home by 10. So
I never paid attention to that one.
I had to. I was always in trouble. Harry and I were always in trouble, let me tell you. But I believe that played a part during the time that he was with, and I believe that the fame had a lot to do with why he really didn't associate too much with his family. Because at that time, that's all Harry was focused on, was what he was doing, who he was, and how well he was doing. During his Diamondback days, that was the career starter for him.
Oh, yeah.
And, I just don't think at that time he was old enough to handle it, or mature enough to handle it, I should say. Because like I said, we were all very sheltered And he went out and almost became famous overnight. So no, nobody can really handle that kind of fame unless you've been around it or you know how to deal with it. I don't think he did. He had money, and I know he was spending it left and right. So
I will say this. I have to say this before I lose the thought. I think that he was one of the nicest people to his fans. I've heard. Like pictures of kids in the '80s with Harry Leary. He would take his time and really spend time, and he talked to the kids. He signed autographs. I think he loved that part of it.
He did love that part of it because growing up, my dad was not a hands-on dad. My dad, I think, only went to one of Harry's races, and that was it. I think Harry took the way he was raised and how he felt to another level as far as these kids that were idolizing him. I think Harry wanted to give more of himself because it was something Harry never got from his own father.
I can see that.
Yeah, interesting point.
And I think that's why he was so kind, because he was. I would see him out there and I was like, my God, who are you? You're actually being nice. We got into it all the time, Harry and I did. But, oh my gosh, we had the best relationship. We really did.
Great. What's so great is that you've got all the good memories and you can laugh and because you need to have those. And it's tough. It's tough. And you've been so kind to share with us everything about Harry as a person, not a BMX racer, but also as a BMX racer. And then to share with us bluntly about, what happened to him and dispel the rumor mill. And I think that's important because it's so important because there are those fans out there that they've got to move on too, because they felt like to a lot of them, they felt like Harry was their family too, Yes.
And I want to touch on that a little bit. My mother did not want to do a celebration of life with the whole BMX world because my mother felt that BMX took her son from her. So we did a family and, Eddie was there. His best friend, Greg, was there. We put Harry to rest. I had him cremated. And so we put him to rest in Lake Havasu.
Oh, okay.
The lake. And he's got a paver under the canal that I walk pretty much 2-3 times a week. I will stomp it when I walk by, simply because if I didn't, he would wonder why I didn't. And then I have a memorial down under a tree where we actually put some of Harry's ashes. So I go there a lot to see him. And that's what he would have wanted. He ultimately would have wanted, but Greg was able to get closure because Eddie, because he came to Harry's funeral, so to speak. So that's when we started talking about the Dirt Fest. Is that what it's called?
Dirty Fest.
Dirty Fest.
Yes.
So that's why we're going to be out there those 3 days doing a celebration of life for Harry.
That'll be wonderful. Yeah, that'll be wonderful.
And that's
we'll be there.
I am looking so forward to meeting you guys. I really am. So we'll be there. We're going to have, I guess, a tent that I'm hoping to get Harry's bike from Daylight just to have it there. I personally, I want to have some kind of a book, a diary, so to speak, where people could write down how Harry influenced their life.
That's a great idea.
That's wonderful.
Because my mom doesn't really know. All she knows is the bitterness of losing her son to the BMX world, but not what Harry did for the sport, not how he influenced people, not how he made these young kids feel. So,
my goodness. Yeah, he major impact.
Yeah,
he really helped shape. He shaped the sport. He was one of the guys that shaped BMX in the
If
early
you
days.
name the top 10 guys, I mean, he's going to be in that list every time. Every time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that, to help, the BMX world, because they were, that was who Harry was. That was, I felt that Harry was cheated out of that by not doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to do a celebration of life for him. And I feel it would be what Harry wanted.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that you're doing that. And
a perfect venue for it too.
And he would love that. Yeah.
That was Eddy's idea. Eddy put it together. He orchestrated it, but Eddy is such a good friend and always has been here. Always has been.
Guy. He
really is. He's an awesome, good guy. So yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about or mention before we wrap it up, Linda?
Well, I have a really funny story if you want to hear it about Harry.
We would love to end on a funny story. That would be great.
Let's do that then. We were out camping one day and he went in to brush his teeth and picked up the tube of toothpaste, put it on his toothbrush and started brushing his teeth. It turned out to be preparation H.
Oh, man.
So I never, ever let him live that down, ever. So, yeah, that was a funny story of Harry.
I don't know what that would taste like, but I would think you would know immediately.
Would not want to know.
Well, it was dark, and he did not, I guess he just grabbed the closest tube at hand and put it on his brush and started brushing his teeth. And, I do that sometimes in the morning. I'll just be brushing my teeth and be half asleep. And then he finally did realize it. So, yeah.
Well,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. And also, everyone, Linda shared some great photos of Harry as a kid, and some photos that are probably not how you remember him. Like one in a tux and one in a. So we're going to be sharing those with you too, and that's great. So, Linda, thanks so much for taking the time to be on Super Rad BMX and tell us about your brother.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm very glad I got to talk to you guys. It's been weighing on me, and I just feel that it was time for the truth, the whole truth, and to understand what led up to it, and to understand who Harry was, and regardless of how he died, what was on that death certificate, you can't take that away from who he really is and what he's done for the BMX world. And anybody that knows him, that honors him, will honor him still.
Yes, I agree. And it's not swept under the carpet like it was a bad thing. It was just part of Harry's life, and let's move on.
Let's do that. Yeah. And I appreciate your guys' help with that, bringing it out there, putting it out there for, for the world to know.
We're happy to be part of it. He was part of our lives too with the BMX world. So thank you so much again. And we're going to look forward to seeing you out at Dirty Fest.
Oh my God, I'm going to be there for sure.
Cool.
I'll be in that little tent, and I'm going to come meet you guys and just pick your ear, and you got to tell me stories and show me some of those old bikes you got back there. I'm
an
antique lover.
We'll have a lot of them out there. There'll be plenty of bikes at that place. That's for sure.
Yeah. I bet. I'm looking forward to it very much.
And a lot of Harry's friends. Friends.
Right. And I have a guy coming from Australia. I don't know if you know Nate Gray. He's a collector of anything Diamond Back.
Oh, okay.
So he's actually going to be staying with me, and he's coming to the celebration of life because he was instrumental in getting Harry out to Australia. And then Harry brought Nate back here. And so that's how Harry became famous. I guess he's very famous in Australia.
Yeah, he's famous all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Right. And you know what? Now you have the story, and we're going to finish up talking with Eddy right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. I really like Eddy. Very much so. You know what? Here's another side note. I used to hang out with Harry and his friends because they were really super cute. So I did have a crush on Eddy King way back when, and Clint Miller. I need to point that out.
Clint Miller. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was why I hung around with my brother back then, was his cute friends.
I can see why she hung around with her brother. Yeah, all his friends.
Right?
Maybe that's why Harry had so many friends too.
You know what? I
There
never
you
thought
go.
of that. I never did think of that. I think I'll ponder that for a little while.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen.
All right.
It was a pleasure. You guys.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was, it gave new perspective on everything, and it helps us because, it's one thing to lose a hero or a friend, but a family member, it's a whole different level. And Ed, what's the one thing that you would like to say about Harry that you think really needs to be said, that talks about his character and things like that?
Let me go back a little bit here. I've known him for a long time on all different levels and everything. And a lot of people may not know this, but the last few years, I kind of cut him off, just because I don't need any of that. Not craziness necessarily, but the drama. Exactly. It's just, when you get to this age, I think you want to live a drama-free life as much as possible. I mean, you think that you've got life figured out when you get to this age and everything was cool and everything. But, with Harry, there was still some drama that he had. And, we had a falling out, and I kind of had to cut him off, basically. I had to say, because he's been to my house, and he carries a gun under his seat in his truck. I just don't need the craziness, and that there is some craziness with him, and a lot of it, after the fact of his passing and everything, you start to think, I knew he was bipolar without a doubt, and I think, I'm okay with saying that, but he would never take anything for the bipolar. He would never take any medicine, for it. And that probably would have helped him out a lot. The only thing is, I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, Mike Tyson was bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Tyson didn't take the meds because it probably wouldn't give him that edge that he needed as a racer, I think. So that was probably one reason there that Harry had a lot of these volatile moments, throughout his career, then, I think you got to look at Harry I talked to him before about his being volatile all the time, and he swore to me, he thinks he had CTE, and, I remember the big crash.
Which is, for those of you that don't know, a repeated head trauma, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he thinks he had it. I mean, the way that he was talking to me and some other people a few years ago, it was like, Harry, you're crazy. That stuff never happened, type of thing. And the head stuff, I don't know how many times he fell before I knew him. And I don't know how many times he fell after I stopped racing in '88, because he kept on racing.
Oh, he raced all the way. Yeah. I mean,
he never quit racing.
So I don't know that whole part of his, injury list for the most part. I remember the big crash he had in Corona when he hit the telephone pole, with his head. And
man, I didn't know about that. So, yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that crash. I don't remember too many other incidents where, he had head trauma for anything else, or, whatever it may be. There is a lot to be said regarding CTE and the guys that raced back in the 70s, and even the guys that did freestyle. There just wasn't enough information back then to know what was going on. And, I think we can look back on that now as something that, we see it a lot with football players, but we never really charted it with BMX racing, or BMX people or, at all to see how they did, what I mean?
And it's a little bit of a misnomer with CTE because it's, repeated head injury. But all it takes is 2 or 3 serious concussions, and that's considered repeated. And and as long as Harry raced, and you also mentioned something about not wanting to take medication for bipolar because he would take a little of his edge away. He may not want to tell people about an injury that he was suffering from because he didn't want to lose his sponsor or something like that.
I couldn't see him ever admitting anything like that. Just knowing him I didn't know him well, but I knew him enough, to know that, competing at the highest level he could possibly compete was that man's number one goal.
Yeah.
I mean,
towards the end, I just really described it as a Jekyll and Hyde sometimes. I didn't, I saw him one time at Chandler, middle of the week or something like that. When he was out there practicing, he was telling me about this huge laceration he had on his hand, and it looked pretty bad. And he was like, I'm surprised he could even still race and hold on to the bike. But he seemed like everything was totally cool and normal. And like, we didn't have this falling out a year ago or anything, or whenever it happened 2 years ago. Everything seemed, like everything was cool. And for me, it wasn't like that. It was like, I was very kind of cold and distant to him at the time. But I mean, that's Harry. I mean, he's got, probably one of the biggest hearts when it comes to teaching people BMX, getting people exposed, getting people to improve. He knows everything. He knows the mental aspect. He knows, he could tell you, some of the things that helped him get on the covers, and a lot of that has to do with, an immaculate bike with an immaculate uniform. That's what the photographers liked. That's what they did. I mean, if you look at any of his pictures, his bike is not really dirty. It's sparkling, and it helps to have nice fresh shoes too. It's kind of a pet peeve.
Yeah, it's a tragedy any way you look at it. I mean, it's a
tragedy in a way that I think the way that he passed away, I think that's the tragedy, and I don't know about that. Just my personal thought about it is the fact is that he passed away alone, if any way possible. I don't think anybody wants to pass and go on to that other life, doing it alone, and I think it was the sad part. I think thinking about him being in his car and basically, passing out and dying alone. The guy, like I said, he's one of the Mount Rushmores of BMX, in my opinion.
No, I think your relationship was so long-standing, and you had a multifaceted relationship. It wasn't just you saw him at the track. You actually traveled with him. You experienced life with him, and that makes a whole different perspective than anyone else would have.
My greatest memories are with him are probably about 10-15% racing, and the rest of it is getting to these races and getting home from these races, because that's when we could not worry about some of the antics that we did. I mean, is the stories that I'll have for the rest of my life that I'll, can talk to people about later on, just some fun stuff, some crazy stuff.
Like that one rental car story. What one's that?
There's 100 of them. I mean, I could tell you the one.
Everybody has a rental car story.
Yeah, I can tell you that we were pushing our car out of the mud when Ronald Reagan got shot that Monday. because it had rained, and we went out thinking that we were in the Baja 1000 with a rental car, and we got it stuck in the mud. So we're trying to get it unstuck from the mud, and the radio is telling us that Ronald Reagan got shot. Another time is when we had 2 Ford station wagons, and we had half the team in my car, half the team in his car, and we basically took it autocrossing out in the woods somewhere in the Northwest. And when we pulled in to drop these cars off and to get into the shuttle bus to go to the airport, it's like all 4 wheel wells were packed full of mud, and they just dropped right there when we dropped these cars off. And it was like, oh man, let's just get out of here. And whenever we go to the race and we hear this code of conduct speech before the nationals, we go, oh my God, we needed that like back in the 80s, because I don't know how we all survived doing some of the antic things that we did. I mean,
I had no code of conduct committee that was looking out after all the people and the racers and the pros.
It was bad news.
It's a free for all.
Wild West.
We were on a plane one time on a 727 plane, and one of the engines blew up. Literally.
What?
Blew up. Yeah, it blew up.
God.
And because they had 3 engines, one on the top and then 2 on the bottom. And so one of the side ones blew up literally. So they decided to turn around and go back to LAX. And the plane was dropping all the fuel off the wings off it, because they didn't want to, carry all that fuel when they landed.
Or they had to dump the fuel. Yeah.
Yeah. So Harry puts on his helmet, and the flight attendant comes by and goes, "Sir, if you do that, you might get some people nervous around here. Can you restrain from putting on your helmet?"
That's awesome.
And I was like, "Oh man, keep it nearby, Harry. You don't have to put that thing on."
That's awesome.
You take it off?
Yeah, he took it off.
If people were like, "I wish I had a helmet." Damn it!
Exactly. He goes, "That guy's
hey
smart,
man, he thought ahead,
prepared."
Yeah, and then I don't know. Some of the other fun trips too were the ones to Bercy. When we were racing in Paris, I think
over in France, yeah.
Like 4, 5, and 6, or those were some great races there, and it was cool because it was just all the pros that came out there. So we got to hang out with other guys from other teams that we never really hung out with before. There's some good stories.
When you went over there, it was almost like you were the team because you were the Americans, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I think we would all fly from France back to LAX, and then from LAX we kind of dispersed from there. When you catch a flight, the Pattersons would catch a flight to Northern California, catch a flight down to San Diego or whatever. But it was just some good times traveling.
Those videos are fun to watch too, because there's a number of those that are out there on YouTube from those races.
Yeah.
Now, Eddie, you're a real active individual. I mean, you're always doing stuff. I run into you places, even like at Barrett Jackson. You always ring me up, and I always love that. You ring me up, say, "Hey, Brad, I'm here," and I'm running a million ways. You're running a million ways, but we always get together, even if it's 5 minutes. And but the one thing that you always have time for is to make it out to like Dirty Fest and all the different events that are going. And what's it like for you to see all your pals, see the racing? You get to participate in so many ways. I mean, it's just it's pretty cool atmosphere.
I think, yeah, it's the memories. It's all about the memories. We sit back there and we talk. We don't even talk about racing necessarily. We talk about other things, family life, what you're doing, post-career. I talked to Lee Medlin every now and then. He came down before the Supercross race, borrowed my other e-bike, and we did a mountain bike ride that morning.
Oh, nice.
Before the Glendale Supercross. I'm friends with Nelson Chanity, and people never would have thought that if you would have known, we never spoke one word before to one another for the most part. And after the fact, I mean, it's racing, it's over with, it's done. We're all grown-ups now. And, for the most of us, we're already have grown kids that have gone and left, so now it's like we got to figure this golden year part on how you want to do it, so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun reconnecting with these people, and they may remember things that you don't remember. I think that's kind of the fun part about it. And even now, we make a lot of memories the way that, by just, we used to get a beach house in San Diego for the Hall of Fame, and, just hanging out there, riding bikes on the boardwalk and barbecuing and, having a great time, it's just memories. It's all it is. It's just making memories.
Oh, it's absolutely great. And one thing you said that's so true is like everybody has a little bit different memory than, like the guys I hung out with were like Brad and Greg Grubbs and Joe Baumert. And I had lunch with Grubbs about a month ago, and he remembers things that I don't remember, and sometimes I'll remember things that he doesn't remember.
Yeah.
It's actually it's actually like a real blessing to be able to hang out with people that we were, like, I don't go to high school reunions that much, but BMX and the people that we hung out with when we were teenagers, it seems like those are our closest friends. It's still a bond.
Yeah,
right.
No, exactly. It still is. I mean, it's hard when you think about going to, all right, let's just say you went to 15 to 35 races that year. It's hard to remember every single weekend and how everything happened or how things involved. And like, I honestly can't remember really racing inside of Charlotte Motor Speedway back in the 80s. And I know I've been there because people have showed me photos, but I don't remember hardly anything about that trip at all. Not at all. Not one thing.
It's like little highlights, things that were important to you always stick out in your mind, in your memory.
It's like similar to like you see documentaries about rock stars who don't remember like a whole summer of, shows they put on because it's so repetitive. You went everywhere.
But
you were at all the races.
The other thing too is that you got to remember is like you flew there, you got to the hotel, you went to the track, you raced, went back to the hotel, went back to the track in the morning, you raced, and then you went back to the airport on Monday and you flew home. You didn't really get a chance to do anything else. It was really kind of like so focused and just get your sleep, clean your bike, be ready to race the next day, do it again the next day and go home. That was it. You never got to like, well, there was one time we did race Millersville, Maryland, I think it was, or maybe it was Braddock, New Jersey. Maybe where we did go actually to Washington, D.C. as a team.
Oh, that's cool.
And we got to do a little tour inside the Capitol building in there and everything else. And then too bad we didn't have, camera phones then, but it was really pretty cool to do something.
It might have been at Millersville, Maryland, because I remember the first time I went to Washington, D.C. was when we were at that Maryland race. And I went there and it was like nighttime and everything was closed, but it was still pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a lot of memories with Harry, a lot. And, some of them aren't like all about racing. Like, I've met him out at the river before, and done some things like that with him.
Well, you know what? And that's what keeps an individual's, life alive is when you talk about him, Eddie, and you tell people about him and you tell about how, you guys traded secrets on the track and starting positions and about, going on trips together and traveling because, once we're gone, all we have are those people that talk about us. I had somebody tell me once, because I've lost both my parents, and they said, well, you just got to say their name once in a while because, that's what keeps them alive, and I do that. So,
I think a lot of people could go on here and tell you that at one time Harry coached him, or at least he went to one of his clinics or something like that. back when he was doing things like that, and that's kind of I think kind of the cool story whenever I would meet up with them, like, we would sit there and talk and have lunch, and he'd say, "See that kid right there? Some like 18-year-old kid. Yeah, he used to come over to the track that he used to run back in, I don't know, mid-90s or whatever." Because he ran a few tracks too, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yep. Not that long ago, I don't think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and the thing is, everybody
my memory
has different impressions of people. And sometimes it's because they only had, instead of a wide scope like you had, they had just this real narrow. They saw him one time in person, and maybe it was on a bad day, or maybe it was, it was going wrong, and that's, it happens with everyone. But when you have fame, when you are in the spotlight, it's under a magnifying glass, and that's what happens.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, when it's all said and done with, I think majority of people are going to always remember the good side of Harry, the Harry that they cared a lot, that did things for other people, and they'll think of him as also being super focused on what needed to be done, overly focused, you could say, and I hope people kind of realize, what, that's kind of was built in his character. When you think of some of the things that might have happened to him with, him being bipolar, him having potentially CTE, which I've talked to a few people with, and they think that he did have it, he's a complicated person, but he did his positive things that he did outweighed definitely some of the bad things that he did.
Yeah, and that's what's important. And
he's not perfect, and none of us are perfect.
I mean, as humans, we're all, we're fragile. We're not perfect. There's no one's running a test with a checklist. So you did this good, you did this bad, you did 5 things good, you did this good.
Well, if we're in the Matrix, they might be. They might be checking on us, but
that's true. But I guess my point is that I remember the good things definitely about Harry.
Yeah. I think the majority of people do, and I think, Ed, it says a lot about your character, wanting to focus on Harry tonight, because it could have been all about Eddy, and you wanted to make sure that that we talked about your teammate, and because he had done clinics and ran tracks and raced, and I mean, talk about a guy who dedicated his life to BMX. I mean, Harry Leary is got to be right up there with the guys that have. And
I know that he was. People don't know this, but I guess I can say it now, that he was part of that balance team in '91. I want to say it is, the balance mountain bike team.
Okay.
That's when Cozy left Western States Diamondback to go do his own bicycle company at the time. And they were doing a mountain bike at the time. And he picked up my brother to ride for the balance team. And he went to the UCI Downhill World Championships on balance. And I want to say it was 92 or 93. I can't remember. He ended up winning the world championships for the UCI downhill mountain bike at the time. But that was Harry with balance that got him that. Okay. And that basically rolled him over to GT for the mountain bike and the, partial BMX, and, him and Lopes, you can say, brought over the clips for BMX.
Right.
Your brother did.
Yeah. But that, my brother owes a lot of gratitude from my brother owes a lot of gratitude to Harry for putting him on that balance team and putting him out there to win that downhill world championships. I mean, that,
that's awesome.
That cements him in, the mountain bike Hall of Fame and the USA Cycling Hall of Fame right there.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. I remember when Harry was on balance too, because 1993 was the first year, because I still have the letter in a tote and filed away that Clayton John sent former pros. And it was the first year of the ABA called it the Masters class. It was basically evolved into Vet Pro. So 1993 was the first year of Vet Pro. And
he won it
he won the
3 years in a row.
He won the whole thing that year. And I went to one race. I went to the first race because I was the only non-West Coast guy they invited. And I don't know, if they felt sorry for me or what they did, but my name was on the thing. So I went down to Phoenix and I raced, and I only made the main one day. And I have a picture of myself with Harry and Stu Thompson and Turnell Henry. And, for me, that was a hell of a memory to be like, oh, I'm racing Harry Leary for this Masters, class thing. And then to follow him through the year and see that he took it seriously. Obviously, he won the whole thing. That was the first year of a Vet Pro class.
Yeah. I think he won it 3 years in a row, or at least 2. I think I've seen that. I've seen it on the wall before.
Yeah. And I remember his bike was a balance frame.
Yeah.
Tim, on that Wikipedia printout that you have, what year was he inducted into the Hall of Fame? Unless you know, Ed.
I don't. I think he was like a couple years before me, or the second year, which was 83?
Down in Chula Vista when they did it down there, right?
Oh, no.
Oh, really?
For Harry?
Yeah.
No, that was.
Oh, wait, 83.
Yeah.
They did Harry in Tulsa.
I thought you meant 93. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
What year, Tim?
I don't see it on here.
Huh.
But that would have been when they were still doing it in
Oklahoma City and some
at the
Marriott hotel
at the banquet, our banquet that everybody would be like, we got to get the gate drop so we can all run back to our hotel, change, and go to the banquet, and we always had to sit at that head table where we would get there so late that if we wanted to eat our food, we had to do it in front of everybody. It was the worst. But
they never let us eat.
Well, I'm glad things have changed and they've gotten a little bit.
I don't see it.
Glad things have changed in what?
The Hall of Fame has gotten a little better.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
changed for the better. Yeah. I mean, it's
quite BMX needed a real place,
Oh yeah. That is a real place too. That's the collection that, that curator guy does, Gork. He does a really good job there.
Man, it's cool. It's first class all the way.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, as we wrap things up, what else would you like to talk about your career or about what you're doing now or anything else?
Oh, let's see. In a few months, I'll be headed out to Guy Cooper's event in Oklahoma.
Oh,
so I'll be doing that one there. And obviously that's just before Dirty Fest. And then we'll see how the rest of the year go. But just, I'm looking forward to going to Texas in a few months. And let's just keep this party rolling.
Yeah, man.
Everybody stay healthy.
Well, we always enjoy seeing you out at the events when we run into you, wherever it is. And man, we sure appreciate you taking time to come on Super Rad BMX.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me at Super Rad BMX, and hope you enjoyed the show.
It was great, man, and we appreciate bringing so much perspective on the background and Harry Leary especially. So All right.
And you're welcome back. Welcome back anytime.
Absolutely.
So thank you again.
All right. You guys have a good evening.
Hey, everyone, just as a reminder, find us at Radmatic channel on YouTube, and you can find all of our episodes there, plus bike buildups, everything. Tim and I are trying to make it the magazine of the internet now, the BMX magazine, with buildups, bike tests, interviews, race coverage, everything. And we hope you're enjoying it, but let us know. Let us know in the comments, if there's something that we're missing out on. And, of course, wear some swag so when we see you out at the events, we can find our fans. And thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next time, and that's a promise, not a threat. Super Rad BMX.
See you guys.
This is the Super Rad BMX Podcast. Down the first straight is the cruising Cornhusker over the jump bonsai Brad. Now your host Brad Fanshaw and Tim Lilladora.
Get ready to represent the Super Rad BMX Podcast in style with these rad BMX t-shirts. They're perfect for listening to your favorite Super Rad BMX Podcast episodes, hitting the track, or cruising around town, and showing off your passion for BMX culture. Join the Super Rad BMX community and showcase your love for this podcast with these awesome vintage BMX t-shirts. Order yours today on radmatic.com and ride in style.